I am broken.
Nikolas Cruz, who murdered 17 students and staff with a semi-automatic rifle at a Florida high school, was sentenced to life in prison Wednesday after listening to hours of anguished testimony from survivors and victims' relatives. Megan Kelly's sister, Elena, was one of Cruz's victims.
The first major event of my adult life was when I was 19, when my sister was shot to death. And now my early 20s are ending with being told that no justice will be done in her memory. He gets daily meals, a roof over his head, and a bed to sleep in now. My sister's body is food for carrion. Her roof is 6 feet of dirt, and her bed is a coffin.
A jury voted last month to spare the 24-year-old from the death penalty, instead choosing life in prison without the possibility of parole for one of the deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history. Cruz pleaded guilty last year to premeditated murder for his rampage on February 14, 2018. Many victims' relatives castigated the jury's decision and criticized a state law requirement that all 12 jurors be unanimous in order to sentence a convicted person to be executed. Cruz murdered Max Schachter's son, Alex.
This wasn't somebody that fell through the cracks, and you know it. He is a sociopath that does not deserve to live amongst us. That creature has no redeemable value. And the other prisoners that you will encounter in your new life will inflict that pain upon you, hopefully 17 times over again, until you're screaming for mercy, just like your victims.
Some addressed Cruz directly, who sat alongside his public defenders wearing red prison overalls and handcuffs. Cruz was 19 when he attacked students and staff at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland. He had been expelled from the school. Cruz shot Samantha Fuentes in the leg that day. She asked if he remembered making eye contact with her while she lay on the floor of her classroom, bleeding.
You were a hateful bigot with an AR-15 and a God complex. You still are, minus the gun. You might have everyone else fooled, but not me, because this is personal. Racism is not a mental illness. Perfectly planned and articulated manifestos and plans are not characteristics of the sickly or the mentally unhinged.
Some of the survivors went on to organize a youth-led movement for tighter gun regulations in the United States, which has the highest rate of private gun ownership in the world, and where mass shootings have become recurrent.
In a dramatic diplomatic breakthrough on Wednesday, the Ethiopian government and Tigrayan forces agreed to a surprise deal, putting a halt to a 2-year war that has killed thousands, displaced millions, and left hundreds of thousands facing famine. Delegates from both sides signed an agreement in South Africa just over a week after formal peace talks began.
Two parties in the Ethiopian conflict have formally agreed to the cessation of hostilities, as well as to systematic, orderly, smooth, and coordinated disarmament.
Olusegun Obasanjo from the African Union mediation team praised the process as an African solution to an African problem.
This moment is not the end of peace process, but the beginning of it.
An agreement had not been expected so soon. The United Nations called it a step in the right direction.
This is very much a welcome first step, which we hope can start to bring some solace to the millions of Ethiopian civilians that have really suffered during this conflict.
In Washington, U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price told reporters it will continue to engage to advance the peace agreement.
What we will have to see is follow-through. And the United States will be there. We will be there to continue working with the African Union. They will continue to lead this process.
The war stems from a breakdown in relations between regional power blocs over control of Ethiopia as a whole. The agreement does not address the deeper political tensions that contributed to the conflict. Eritrea and other forces from inside Ethiopia who have taken part in the conflict on Ethiopia's side did not take part in the talks.
Streets are exploding with drugs and violence.
This is a campaign ad put out by Republican Senate candidate J.D. Vance in Ohio. He's up against Democratic candidate Tim Ryan.
Tim, fight the criminals, not the cops.
It's a message Republicans are blasting in the final days before the critical November 8 midterm elections that will determine control of the U.S. Congress. Fear of crime appears to be resonating with voters across the country, from Texas
in Houston, it's crime, economy,
to New York.
Going into the midterm election, I think everyone should really look at the crime rate that's going on in New York.
New York is in crisis.
Republican Lee Zeldin, seeking to beat New York Democratic Governor Kathy Hochul, has hammered her over what he called her catch-and-release policies toward criminals that were making New Yorkers unsafe. While he remains behind her in most polls, his approval has climbed since August as he's amplified his message about crime.
There are criminals out there who need to pay the consequences for their action instead of the catch-release policies that Kathy Hochul champions.
It is a joke to talk about a crime policy that doesn't include doing something about illegal guns.
Hochul and other Democrats hit back that Republicans have refused to pass what gun control advocates call common sense laws to improve public safety.
Let's have background checks. Let's have safety checks. Let's do it smart. You were nowhere to be found, Lee.
Criminologists agree that crime is up, but blaming progressives and liberals is not as easy as Republicans might lead voters to believe.
Criminologists will tell you that overall crime trends, nationally speaking, are not all that responsive to individual policy changes at the local level.
Reuters correspondent Joseph Axe has been digging into crime statistics ahead of the election.
When, for example, the homicide rate goes up or down by a significant margin, that tends to cut across geographic lines. It tends to happen in cities with more progressive justice policies or less progressive justice policies, states that are run by Republicans, states that are run by Democrats, because they're really reacting to broader societal and economic factors.
FBI statistics show murders spiked nearly 30% in 2020 to a two-decade high. All violent crime, including offenses such as robbery and assault, went up 5.2%. But crime trends after 2020 aren't as clear.
There's no question that murder and violent crime went up significantly in 2020 when the pandemic struck. But since then, it's been a little more of a mixed bag. So the data suggests that murders continue to go up slightly in 2021. And to the extent that we have data for 2022, so far it appears that murder and violent crime has gone down this year. And so it doesn't lend itself to a simple political narrative. It's simultaneously true that the murder rate and violent crime hasn't shifted that much over the last couple years. It's also true that it's still quite a bit higher than it was in 2019. So there is some reason for folks to feel as though there are more murders happening now, because there are. It's still quite a bit lower than the kind of bad old days of the 1990s when crime was a lot more prevalent across the United States.
U.S. stocks ended sharply lower on Wednesday in a wild whipsaw session in which the market quickly turned positive and then reversed course again after comments from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell shattered initial optimism that the Fed might be ready to ease up on its fight against inflation. The central bank again delivered another giant rate increase of 75 basis points, the fourth this year. Powell then added that it was very premature to be thinking about pausing rate hikes. That was enough to unnerve investors. The Dow ended 1.5% lower, the S&P 500 fell 2.5%, while the Nasdaq dropped well over 3%. Eric Sterner, Chief Investment Officer at Apollon Wealth Management, explains.
The market initially reacted positively when they saw the, as anticipated, 75 basis point rate hike and hints of possible slower rate hikes in the future. I think that's what the market was most interested in, as far as whether the Fed was acknowledging that it's maybe time to slow down the rate hikes. It seemed that investor sentiment soured a bit during Jerome Powell's news conference, as it definitely had a more hawkish tone. We still have a ways to go as far as a lot more work to do to bring inflation down, and the ultimate terminal rate is going to be most likely higher than what we thought a few months ago, just due to inflation stubbornness and the resiliency of the labor market, which keeps upward pressure on the inflation.
Mega-cap tech stocks Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon all posted big losses amid the prospect of prolonged high interest rates. Shares of Meta, which can hardly be called a mega-cap anymore, also lost ground, its market cap now smaller than that of PepsiCo. Among the gainers was Tinder owner Match Group, which reported better than expected third-quarter revenue, and shares of CVS Health rose after the company raised its annual profit forecast and settled thousands of lawsuits with state and local governments over alleged mishandling of opioid painkillers, which will cost the pharmacy chain about $5 billion over 10 years.
Once I get married, if my husband and I decide to have kids, I'm considered a high-risk pregnancy. And if for any reason my doctor decides, and along with me and my husband, that we need to terminate our pregnancy, then I want to have the right to make that decision for myself.
I would like to devolve that power to the individuals, to the women who are in those positions, rather than have the lawmakers decide for those people.
Inflation has impacted like so much, obviously with gas, just obviously being able to travel as much as I would want to, but also how that affects what's in stock at stores and how those prices are. With trying to start my own business, it's challenging too for other people to invest in me when they have their own struggles with dealing with inflation as well.
In Houston, it's crime. I think nationwide and statewide, it's economy. Having a sensible immigration policy is important to me as well.
Inflation is really concerning right now. Prices are just soaring. People can't afford anything, and Social Security doesn't even help with my husband's check. To me, that's most important. Gun control. I don't think they're doing enough for it. I really don't. I think that's a big issue. Children frightened to go to school, parents frightened to send their children to school. I mean, I go to a store now and I'm concerned, is there going to be a shooter? Am I going to be safe?
The right to life, pro-life, I believe that is something that is extremely important to the heart of God. That, life begins first in the mind of God, right? And then it begins also at conception. So that, I believe, is paramount.
For me, abortion is more important than inflation at this point. Taking away the rights of half the population to do what they've been able to do for the last 50 years, I think is a mistake. It's wrong, particularly when some of these Supreme Court justices have said that they weren't going to upturn these issues.
Going into the midterm election, I think everyone should really look at the crime rate that's going on in New York. I think we're increasing at a rapid rate, and at this point, that's just something that we need to solve in order to, obviously despite COVID, everything kind of went downhill, but now we need to get New York back again.
The pro-choice, and that's a big issue, that's huge. I think also education and what's happening with education and the don't say gay is crazy.
Money is what matters the most. Abortion it's an issue, but it's going to come up. The economy affects everybody. Abortion affects not everybody. So I think economy is going to weigh more heavily on voters' minds.
Abortion rights, because nobody has the right to make a choice for anybody. I'm way beyond that, but my body, my choice. The economy will always bounce back. I've seen it go up and down, and it is important right now. I think minimum wage. I mean, we're a little luckier here in California that it's a little bit higher than other places, but even at $15 or $16 with the price of gas, anybody that's working minimum wage and has to drive very far, they're just paying for gas.
Women's rights, that's the main thing that kind of motivated me to come out here, was the Roe versus Wade getting overturned. Kind of afraid of my girlfriend, my sisters, and my mom losing their rights.